good morning or afternoon to all those that have joined us for our monthly FSMA Fridays discussion brought to you by Stacey Chain and the Acheson Group. Very excited. We have lots going on. Third-party auditing will be our primary discussion. But when I say lots going on, busy summer, IFT is right around the corner. Many folks will be at that show, so we'll look forward to possibly seeing you there. But more importantly, let's see what is going on with FSMA. And delighted to be hosting today's session with Dr. David Acheson. Good morning. Well, I should say afternoon, because I know you're out of the States. Good morning.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Jill. Pleasure to be with everybody.
As always with our monthly sessions, recording link will be sent out early next week. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A tab as we get going. And certainly, if the audio is not that great via speakers, please go ahead and call in. So with that, David, why don't you share with us what's the latest on the FSMA front?
Well, yeah, thanks, Jill, and thanks again for hosting FSMA Friday session. It's good to be with everybody today. Well, I think the big news, which is what we're going to focus on right now, is the announcement from FDA with regard to the accredited third-party certification program. That's obviously the focus of our conversation today, so I'm not going to get heavily into it. But we thought it was a good topic to bring up because it does raise a variety of questions, and this is going to, I think this announcement and some of this discussion around it will obviously trigger more questions. I think the only other point that I'd like to mention is we've been getting a lot of questions around, obviously where's the budget going to go with FSMA, what's the administration going to do with FSMA, what rules are vulnerable. And all my read of the tea leaves on that are that, my belief is that FSMA is essentially going to remain largely untouched from any rollbacks with regard to any regulation or certainly with regard to the statute. I just don't see that happening. I don't think there's any appetite to do that. On the funding front, obviously, this is sort of front and center with a lot of things going on in Congress is who's getting cut and who's getting increases. On the funding front, I think FDA is probably going to come out pretty flat, which does come through as a sort of a cut, but not dramatic. And I don't sort of see a huge shift in FSMA enforcement. I think the one part, and this is sort of peripheral to FSMA, but it's FDA related, and again, a lot of questions is what's going to happen to the new requirements for labeling, nutrition fact panel labeling and menu labeling. And I think as everybody who's been involved with this is well aware, this can keeps getting kicked down the road. And it's been kicked yet again recently. I haven't seen a firm announcement of when those requirements may be required. But what I'm hearing, or what I've heard, and I'm sure others have too, is it may not be until 2021. And part of the reason for that is alignment with GMOs. If you remember, there was a lot of debate about GMOs, and finally Congress passed laws which basically put responsibility for creating a GMO labeling program with USDA. And if you track all that through, essentially the compliance dates for that will probably be 2021. So if you have to change your labels for GMOs, and it's all going to track with nutrition fact panel label changes. So I admit a lot of that is speculation, but it does make sense. So a few things going on with FDA, some FSMA-centric and some not so much, Jill. So back to you.
Okay, great, thank you. And I think your speculation always seems to come through, so I appreciate that thought from there. So let's go ahead and dive in with third-party auditing, some thoughts around that. Let's see, as far as why did this FDA create this rule around it? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, my insight on this is it goes back to, frankly, the days when I was at FDA, which nowadays that was a few years ago. But back in 2007, 2008, early part of 2009, and FSMA was being built. And I'm not talking about the regulations, I'm talking about the statute. And there was a lot of dialogue going on between FDA and the Hill about how do you make this work. Everybody felt, industry included, that there needed to be more oversight of foreign manufacturers. And how did you do that? And some of the early versions of FSMA, maybe people on the phone even remember, coming out of the House, was essentially a requirement for annual audits of every registered food facility on the planet by FDA. So they wanted to have enough inspectors to get an FDA inspector into every single food manufacturing facility, wherever it was in the world, if they were exporting into the United States. At the time, FDA was doing maybe, maybe 100, 150 inspections a year. And there was an estimated over 100,000 foreign manufacturers. So when you crunch the numbers on that, the budget increase that FDA would have needed simply to inspect all those foreign facilities was of the order of $3 billion just for inspectors and travel, which, that made the House gulp, and they said, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Long-winded story here, but essentially where that then went was, well, let's leverage the private sector. Let's have the private sector start to, let's leverage some of the audits that are being done there. And obviously there was discussion around, could you leverage GFSI, and was that going to work? And ultimately, that sort of evolved into what it became this third-party auditing rule, which is we'll get into in a second, is really very narrow and very specific. But it does essentially leverage private third-party audits around specific certifications, which with the right oversight, and the right oversight was really critical for this, because there was a lot of resistance from consumer organizations about letting the private sector do any kind of auditing that would be used by FDA. Lack of trust, fox guarding the hen house, etc. But ultimately, the rule, the statute was passed, and FDA was given the authority to create this fairly specific third-party auditing program. So that was really the genesis of it, was the recognition we need to do more. We need to have better lens on what's going on in certain high-risk foreign facilities. We have to leverage the private sector to do it. How do we do that? Well, we put a rule in place that's going to provide extensive governance over this process of accreditation bodies. So long-winded story, Jill, but for those who were perhaps interested in FSMA history, and maybe I should write a book on FSMA history, that's kind of where it all came about. At least that's my belief of the drivers, and definitely at the time when this was being pulled together, those were the discussions that were happening. So that's really why they created it, was to leverage private sector expertise on helping to maintain food safety.
So it's interesting that the dollar figure sort of really drove that, but it seems like that was the best path to get there. So it's interesting. Certainly haven't heard that in the few years we've been doing FSMA Fridays, and I will be the first one to buy that book if you put that together. Add it to your list, because I know you're not too busy racing around the world, right? Right. We move on is, so does this mean that all auditors of FDA facilities will be to be accredited through this program?
Right. Now, that's a key question. And I think many have said, are asking, well, does that, to this very point, will all auditors need to be accredited by this program? And the very clear answer is no. That is not the intent. So what we would consider one of today's audits, a GFSI audit or a non-GFSI related audit, those auditors do not need to be accredited by this program. That's a very clear difference. In a second, we'll talk a little bit about, well, what is the program focused on, but I think this is an important question to clarify and to repeat. This does not mean every auditor out there needs to be accredited by the program. So that's where this one goes, Jill. Okay, great. Thank you.
Move on then and just talk about the how that correlates and the impact on GFSI audits.
Right. Related topic, obviously, is does this impact the GFSI audit? And as I've just said, no, it does not. As many, because we talked about GFSI and GFSI audits in the past on FSMA Fridays, and this continues to be an important topic of how one uses GFSI audits in relation to FSMA, and the recognition of a GFSI audit in the context of FSMA compliance. So that's totally business as usual. The leveraging a GFSI audit as part of your supply chain control program when your hazard analysis determines that you need an on-site audit because you've got a high-risk food that you're bringing in. You know, I've been recommending to our clients is, well, leverage a GFSI audit. Just use that. Make sure that it's meeting FSMA compliance, which they are. The parallels are very solid, and that doesn't change at all. Those audits don't change. The results of those audits don't change. And as some people are well aware, is that this third-party auditing program requires the auditors to provide information to FDA. When it's under the third-party audit program, that is true. You have to send certain things to FDA. GFSI audits, no. They remain exactly as they always have been, and this doesn't impact them.
Oh, okay. And it was interesting. I've taken a few notes on that one because there was some, a little bit of distinction there. So just in regards to, you already sort of talked about this, but, the consequences. So what will be the long-term consequences of this program?
Well, let's sort of leverage this question into, talk about what is this rule focused on. And as I mentioned in sort of the opening question is like, where did it come from and what's it all about? And well, if we're not going to apply this to GFSI audits, then what are we going to apply it to? Mm-hmm. And the third-party audit rule impacts two areas and two areas only. The first one is on the voluntary qualified importer program. And we've talked about that previously on FSMA Fridays, and the FDA put out a guidance document around that probably about a year ago now, September 2016. And for those who are tracking with that, you remember that the voluntary qualified importer program is like a TSA pre for food, where a facility has been checked out and has been found to meet high levels of food safety compliance, which actually go beyond the basics of FSMA, and that when that facility is meeting those high levels of food safety compliance, then they get a fast track into the United States as an imported food product or ingredient. This program, this third-party audit program, is what will essentially set up for the certification bodies to go to issue those certificates for voluntary qualified importer program. In order to be successful in that, you have to be looked at as a foreign facility, essentially audited. Are you complying with those high standards? And if you are, then you get a certificate, and you then get basically the pre-check. And it's this program that is going to oversee those who want to go out and issue those certificates for the voluntary qualified importer program. So that's number one. The second one, which is, I think, speaks more to the consequences of this program, is that the FDA has an authority in which they can require certificates for what the agency deems as high-risk foods. And this goes back, again, there's a story on this one, which we probably don't have time to get into. But interestingly, this one also goes back to melamine in pet foods in 2007. where, very briefly, the story on that one is that the Chinese government requested FDA, when there was products coming into the U.S. with melamine, they said to FDA, could the agency require certificates for all imported foods? And at the time I was at the agency, and we looked at that, and we didn't have the authority to do it. And as FSMA was built, one of the things that Congress thought would be a good idea is to give FDA the authority to require certificates for what the agency deemed as high-risk foods. To date, the agency has not deemed anything as high risk that requires a certificate for import, but they have that authority, and when they make that decision, and they will, and no doubt, at some point they will deem certain foods and so certain regions of the world or certain countries or certain manufacturers high risk. And when they do that, foods from that particular part of the world or manufacturer will be required to have a certificate. And it's going to be the third-party audit program that will have the authority to issue those certificates. GFSI will not do for that. And that's what this program is about. So again, complicated, long-winded answer, but the bigger consequences of all of this is going to be when the day comes when FDA starts to require certificates for imports. And I firmly believe that day will come. I don't know when, but it will come. And when it does, then people who are looking at this program and saying, well, I don't really want to be part of it, you know, how many people are going to sign up for voluntary qualified program? When they start to require the certificates, then that will be a major consequence of this program. And it will drive it, I think, big time. So those are the two areas. Remember, VQIP, Voluntary Qualified Importer Program, and then the day when FDA requires certificates for high-risk foods. Those two programs will require certificates from accredited auditors, and it is this program that's going to make that work.
So it's almost a conduit to really launching the certificate program, it sounds like. This provides a bit of foundation for that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that will be a consequence, and that will be a game changer. It'll be a game changer in many ways. And that's going to be, I think that's going to cause a lot of angst and potential turmoil in people's supply chains when the day comes when FDA does that.
So I will not press you for speculation on timing other than it's out there, fast approaching, unless you want to comment further on that.
Well, you know me, Jill. I'm always having to speculate. Yeah. It's like it's like just don't hold me accountable on it.
Yeah.
Well, this, to my comment, I think this is going to be a challenge. It's going to be technically difficult to execute on. It's going to require a lot of input from Customs and Border Protection. It's going to require some big shifts. And I think the political environment right now, it doesn't have the appetite to drive this one hard. So I'm not seeing this happening in the next 3.5 years.
Okay. We won't. We'll just bleep that part out of the recording. How's that? That is interesting. As all these different rules and compliance dates and the different, ins and outs of the programs get outlined, you always seem to throw in a couple other angles that weren't really on top of mind or of consideration. So I think, like myself and many on this audience today, I think that is probably the most intriguing thing that we just talked about, right? So very, very interesting. Well, let's go ahead and move on then, sort of take it to the next step as far as what we always talk about with FSMA on Fridays, and sort of a focus in helping companies who are joining us. Should the food companies be doing anything different based on this rule?
Well, fundamentally, no. I don't think food companies should be doing anything different. I think it's wise for food companies to understand the rule, because the rule, if our listeners have tracked with my logic and my thinking on the last couple of questions we've talked about, is this rule has got these two components to it. One of them is arguably a business advantage because it's the voluntary qualified importer program, and it will allow food to come into the U.S. with less burdens if a foreign facility has or is part of that program. Tongue-in-cheek, people have said to me, well, David, will that really make a difference because FDA doesn't stop that much food anyway? And, you know, that's a fair point, is the likelihood of getting stopped isn't high to begin with. But ultimately, I think that will shift. So I think, you know, there is should companies be doing something different here? I think as these programs kick in, then keeping a watch on the voluntary qualified program, and in my view, companies, overseas companies that are compliant with that will be operating to a higher level, no question about that. And, you know, they'll be seen as better actors, if you like, than FDA, than others who are non-part of the program through FDA's eyes. So I think there's something to watch there. Obviously, this other bite of the cherry, so to speak, with this other component of the requirement for certificates for high-risk foods, that is a space to watch very carefully. And should that one start to gain traction, then that will have impact, and companies will need to be paying attention to that one big time and making sure that they are knowing and watching whether something they're importing falls under that. And at the same time, as another dimension to this, as accreditation bodies and certification bodies get into this, knowing who is part of the program could be helpful when the time comes when we're really going to need it. So, you know, it's one of those areas where, do you need to do something different right now? No. I think it's yet another thing for the food safety professional to keep their eye on with regard to potential changes down the road, and just be watching it and again be ready to react when change happens, because change will happen. So it's a little bit of a mixed answer, Jill, of right now, no, don't panic, but it's definitely a space to watch. And which is why I thought it was important for us to chat about this today, because the FDA have just basically put the program in place where the accreditation bodies can sign up and be part of this. So it's moving. This train is moving along.
They can add another component to your supplier scrutiny or program, if you will, and or market advantage, right? I mean, you know, companies are and should be proud that they're accredited to GFSI or whatever else. This might be another stamp, if you will, on that.
And indeed, yeah, right.
Wow, okay. You know, it's interesting when we talked about, you know, sort of a focus for this session. I didn't realize all the different components you were going to throw out there. So thank you for that. But I know a few questions have come in, so we'll go ahead and take those. And in the earnest of our FSMA Fridays format, keep this to the time frame in which we've discussed. I think just a couple of notes I always like to mention: the Acheson group, CAG, and David's group, and the different consultants and services that are afforded by that group. And definitely encourage you to check out achesongroup.com and see how they might be able to help you in building further plans or identifying gaps in FSMA compliance. Also, as mentioned, ISP. I know, David, you have quite a few members of your team that will be there, and we'll put that in the follow-up email and how to possibly connect with you all at the show. Safety Chain will also be there, and look for us. We will have a booth, and look forward. I see many of our customers on the call today, and hopefully those will stop by for going to the show, and or new folks always would like to chat with you about how our solutions can help you automate and gain operational efficiencies and compliance. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to share as we get into the questions. We did launch a LinkedIn group. We post questions and the video recordings on there. If you haven't joined, be sure to do that. And we'll go ahead and just start looking at some of the few of these questions that have come in. Some are related to today. Some of them are just general questions that I know we always like to try to address. So with that, Dan, let me just go ahead and throw out a couple of these questions at you. One question came in, what if the fast track company then has a major recall or gets a bad grade on a third-party audit? Do they lose their status? That's a good one. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think
it might
they will.
be tricky, but yes.
No, I think they will. And there's definitely some language that's being bantered around that you know, there are certain things that will prevent you from being part of the VQIP program, and if that's where this questioner is going. And some of those are ongoing regulatory actions and import alerts and, you know, recent recalls and those types of things. So yeah, I think that history, I think track record will definitely have an impact on this. Right now, what's being discussed is, you know, if you've got that negative history, in other words, you know, you've got a criminal record, so to speak, to use use criminal parlance, and you know, when TSA runs your fingerprints and you come up with a criminal record, you probably aren't going to get the TSA pre. The same basic structure applies to that program on the foods too. So if you've got a history of problems, and I think if I remember correctly, Jill, it was like 3 years before the slate wipes clean again. And I think that would logically pertain to that if a company is part of the program and they have a problem, then they could well get disqualified, which I could see, you know, I can track with FDA's logic for doing that. And if that's essentially the gist of the question is can you be hoofed off the program if you have a problem? I'm pretty sure the answer is going to be yes.
So is there anything, and maybe to drill down here, but just, you know, following up on that, is there anything that defines, you know, says something does come back as a failed audit or something that's automatic suspension or anything to that regard that you're aware of?
Well, you know, if you get a failed audit, you know, if you get a failed GFSI audit, then no, because that's not going to connect with the program. We didn't talk about it on up to this point, but you know, one of the nuances with this, and you know, maybe we need another FSMA Friday on some of the details of this, or at least a part of a FSMA Friday. But one of the things about this is that if you are part of this program, which is obviously, if you've been tracking what I've been saying, is very, very focused on these two areas. Then when the auditor goes in to do the regulatory audit to issue the certificate, they have to tell FDA that they've been there. They have to send FDA a report. And if when they're in there doing this audit, they see something that constitutes a food safety hazard that could lead to a public health concern, they are mandated to tell FDA. It's not like a choice. They are mandated to tell FDA if they're in there doing one of these audits for the certifications for VQIP or high-risk foods. That doesn't apply to GFSI at all, obviously. So, I mean, the whole purpose of that is for FDA to leverage the eyes and the ears of these accredited auditors, which goes right back to what I said at the beginning of the session. Is the purpose of this is to leverage private sector audits to help maintain food safety. And if you think what I said in the first few minutes of our conversation today, it was, well, how can we set up a program using private third-party auditors that will sort of be an extension of FDA's role? And one of the ways is when one of these private third-party auditors is in a foreign plant to issue a certificate for this program and they see a problem, they have to tell FDA. You know, that is de facto an extension of FDA's eyes and ears. When that happens, then you know that there's going to be consequences. It isn't just going to be, oh, all right, thanks for the information. There will be consequences. There will be investigations. There will be testing. So for some, this is actually a very scary program. You know, I've jokingly talked about, well, we're going to have the auditors who, you know, one day are trying to be GFSI auditors and play that role, and then the next day they're operating as an auditor under this program, where they are very clearly an extension of the regulatory agency and are perceived by the auditee in a very, very different light. So I think it could become, arguably, it could become somewhat confrontational in the way this all works. But, once again, it's a long-winded answer to a very simple question, in which, I think there's going to be consequences around this in many ways.
Well, Glenn, I think if my thought around this is, you look at disclosure, right? So you can't silo out information or data. That full disclosure is the key here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is full disclosure, and what's very evident with this program is that the certification bodies that are going to be out there doing these on-site audits are going to have oversight, and they're going to have a lot of oversight, and the oversight is going to be through the accreditation bodies, which is what the FDA has just announced, is putting the program in place for accreditation bodies to apply to be just that, to be an accreditation body. So when somebody, if there isn't full disclosure, Jill, then ultimately, as these programs get looked at, there will be consequences for both the certification bodies and the accreditation bodies if facts have not been fully disclosed, and they're going to get thrown out of the program.
Seems to make sense. Well, and there's one other, and thank you for that, just sort of looking at the different questions that came in. There was just sort of one follow-up, and I think it's just, I'll throw that out there and we'll wrap up today's session. But since this was just announced, there aren't any accredited bodies in place yet, right? And then from there, then the CVs would get accredited. So we're still at the beginning stages. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, Jill. Yeah, no, this is just getting started. So it hasn't gone down that road. And I should have mentioned, and I will, that when it comes to who can be part of this program, it can be anybody. It can be a private entity. It can be a specific individual. Or interestingly, it can be a foreign government. And I think we're going to see. This is another whole topic. Yeah, because for those who spend any time in Asia, you'll well resonate with a comment that I'm going to make about Asian countries are trying to set up certification programs to meet FDA standards. And can I, as a foreign government, issue those certificates for high-risk foods for the FDA? And a number of those foreign entities are looking to do that. Foreign governments are looking to do that. And this opens a window that will allow foreign governments to apply to be, frankly, certification bodies if they want to be, or even accreditation bodies. I mean, I don't think there's anything to stop them. I think that could get politically interesting as we go down that road. But that's a space to watch and for a future conversation.
And I think that would be very interesting indeed, that angle. Absolutely. I'm noting that because I think, watching that and watching how that process plays out is absolutely be a good full conversation. So, wow, okay. It's like I said, when we talked about the topics, we knew that there are all the different components that went into it. So I appreciate, and I know our audience appreciates the insight. I've gotten a few people bidding farewell, and thanks for a good session as always. Anything to wrap up today's session, David? Any last thoughts on what we've been talking about?
We've covered a lot, Jill. No, I'm happy that we could touch on this one. And as you mentioned, I will be at IAFP for a couple of days. So if anybody's on the phone, who'll be there. Stop by, say hello, and if you've got FSMA questions, I'll try and answer them face to face. So no, appreciate everybody's time and Safety Chain and TAG for making this work.
Absolutely. It occurred to me that perhaps at the next industry event, not this one, we'll have to do a FSMA Fridays breakfast or happy hour to get everyone together because we see a lot of familiar faces each month. So thank you. And
Good
for
idea.
all those again, yeah, and for all those that are going to ISP, we look forward to connecting with you. And if not, we will see everyone back online, back on the conversation for our next FSMA Fridays update, the end of July. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.